This is a fine art portrait of a robot by Julia Margaret Cameron, who, of course, was one of the people who really started giving credibility to photography as an art form. And I thought, what would that portrait look like? And this is one example of that.
I find the eyes on this really unsettling, which I really like.
Yes, there's a lot of unsettling things in my AI work, as you'll discover soon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of the Focus Stack podcast. Thank you, everyone who's been subscribing and following along as I post new episodes. Just in case this is your first time checking out the show, please feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. I try to put out an episode a week. Every now and then I get a little bit longer on that, but to try to keep up. We are on episode 12, and we've only been out since the beginning of March, so I feel like we've done a pretty good job with that. Also, if you're interested, we do have an Instagram where you can keep up with updates. I do try to put some little clips and shorts of the show, so you can check that out. And that's on Instagram at Focus Stacked Podcast. This is something that I've had out for a little bit, and I haven't been promoting a lot, but if you'd like to become a Focus friend on Patreon, the monthly membership is $3 a month, and it does allow you to ask questions to the guests before they're on the show. And it also puts your name in the credits, and it's just really, I'm really appreciative for those of you that have already signed up, and it does help kind of offset the cost of the streaming software and things like that. So thank you very much if you're interested in doing that. Also, photographers, if you'd like to be on a future show, I do have a link in the description on all the different platforms. There is a form there where you can sign up. You just drop your website on there. And then after you submit the form, I get in touch with you, and then we can set up a time to record for a future episode. So with all of that out of the way, I'm really excited about today's guest. I've known Todd Dobbs for about 6 years or so, and he's had just an incredible last few years. He's had a lot of different shows, and he's really been exploring the part of photography that everybody is asking about. What do you do with artificial intelligence? And so hopefully in today's episode, Todd will give us some insight on what he thinks about AI and how he incorporates it into his conceptual artwork. So with all of that out of the way, hello, Todd. How are you doing?
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me. Doing great. Appreciate being here and look forward to sharing my work and my stories.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on here because I know that you've recently shown some work and it's caused a little controversy. So I don't know if that'll happen here or not, but I'm really curious to see what type of conversation comes out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Artificial intelligence definitely gets people's emotions up, and for good reason. I completely understand why people get a little, bent out of shape about it because it's a big threat. Of course, there's a lot of issues surrounding copyright and the way that the artificial intelligence models were trained, which, of course, we all know was through scraping the internet without our permission. And I'm completely cognizant of all of that and respect people's opinions. And I also am, have very mixed feelings about the way in which they train these models as well.
So with that, I know that we're going to talk about the AI, but maybe we could start with your creative journey as a photographer and how you got from here to here. And
sure.
And I know in your on your website you talk about how your work sort of bridges the gap from the analog processes that came 100 years before you were born to the things that are happening now. So I'm really curious to see how you talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Let's rewind back to pre-internet, pre-artificial intelligence. Of course, I come from an era before all of that, but I grew up with this technology, and I think that's really important to understand when you're looking at my work and considering my projects and methodology. I was sitting in front of an Apple IIc computer at a very young age, using crude art programs. And then eventually a Macintosh Classic and Mac Paint, some of you may remember. And so I've always had a real interest in technology, and it's always been happening originally it was happening on the side of what I was doing as a photographer. So I started out doing photography, and then, my exploration of technology and digital art was really more of a hobby and just something I was interested in doing on the side. But then by the time I got to high school, those two things really started to converge. But, without my input, it was just because of where we were at. So, but where I got into photography was purely by accident. I love telling this story because as a freshman in high school, I had a scheduling error where I ended up with 4 study halls my first term. And I loved that because that meant 4 times a day, I got to sit quietly and read and not have to do classwork.
Just knowing you, I can imagine you love that.
I love that. Unfortunately, I loved it a little too much. And so I was bragging to a couple of my friends in one of my study halls about how many study halls I had. Big mistake. Because my study hall teacher was also the art teacher, and he overheard. And he said, no, you can't have that many study halls. And so he forced me into a photography class that was supposed to be for sophomores or above. And so I was a freshman. He had to make an exception, but he was doing it because I had too much free time. And I'm really happy he did that. His name was Mr. Ramsey. And so I was very skeptical about it. I was a little annoyed that I had lost some reading time. But the first day that I got into the class, and of course, I was joining the class late, so the other students already were sort of up to speed on the basics. He walked me into the dark room. He put me next to one of the other students who was about to develop a photogram. And so it was a photogram of just a rose. It wasn't super complex composition. But when I saw that piece of paper go into the developer and I saw that image come up, I was just like hooked. And really never looked back. I became completely obsessed with photography from that point forward. And so I took all the photography courses I could during my freshman and then my sophomore year. And then I sort of had exhausted everything I could do at the regular high school. And so this was when I was still in Columbus, Ohio, which has an excellent vocational program for high schools. And one of the vocational programs was commercial photography, which was at Fort Hays. And so I applied for that and got accepted. And then I was also, I was a pretty good student. I had good grades. So my guidance counselor found out that I was about to go to vocational school. And she actually called my mother and said, you shouldn't let him go to vocational school because he's a good student and he can have a real career. Now, my mother, that just motivated her to let me do whatever I wanted.
Oh, that's nice.
So she just encouraged me. She's like, no, if that's what you want to do, you should do that. And so I did. And the vocational program was half days. So, the first half of the day I was at my regular high school and I was taking, math, English, history, government, which was required at the time. And doing all that. And then the other half of the day, I went to this great art school that had a nice big open campus with multiple buildings. And I was just focused on photography. And we had a full darkroom for black and white. We could do color. We had a Wing Lynch processor for color film. We also had a full studio, and Nikon sponsored the program. So we had a whole arsenal of Nikon cameras and lenses. And we also did view camera. So I was doing 4x5.
So that's why you're a Nikon guy.
Yeah, that's why I'm a Nikon guy. I tell people all the time, and they're like, why do you do Nikon? I'm like, because that's what I learned on. And so why would I switch? I also did 8x10 in high school, believe it or not. So wow. That's unusual. And this was early 90s. And then one of the things that happened in the vocational program was Photoshop had just come out a couple years earlier and was starting to get steam. And so Apple and Adobe at the time were partnering up and putting these computers loaded with Photoshop into classrooms like ours as a way to kind of get the next generation hooked. And so we got selected and we had a Quadra 950, which at the time was the most advanced, fastest computer available. And it was loaded up with Photoshop version 2. And so I was using Photoshop right away when, we couldn't even print images at that time, right? Because inkjet printers didn't exist, or at least weren't affordable enough for anybody like us to have access to. And so the way that we would get our images out of the computer is you would send them off to a pro lab, a service bureau, and they would make a 35 millimeter slide of it. And I still have some of those somewhere in my archives. But that really fascinated me. And most of my classmates weren't really into using the computer, so I didn't have a lot of competition. So I spent a lot of time on that computer in between my darkroom hours learning Photoshop. And so, on one side, I'm doing all this analog photography. And then in the same facility with the same instruction, I was also exploring Photoshop. And so that's where that bridging the gap thing really began for me, where I was consecutively using those technologies. And that Photoshop knowledge led to a really cool internship right out of high school, where I was working for a sign company that had gotten a contract from Taco Bell, of all places. Taco Bell saw the future, and they were actually trying to develop picture menu boards where you would walk up, press the picture of the taco or whatever that you wanted, and then you would pay there and just walk up with your receipt to get your food. Now, that never actually got put into play, but for one summer, I spent all of my time scanning 4x5 transparencies that a commercial photographer in Los Angeles had made of Taco Bell products. And then, of course, scans were really bad at the time. So then I spent the remaining time making the tacos look edible again. And that was my real internship.
Taco Bell is my favorite fast food.
It is. Okay. Well, there you go. So I spent a lot of time looking at Taco Bell products, magnified very large on the screen, trying to make them look, the way that they had actually looked on the transparency. So I went to college, and when I went to Ohio State eventually. I started at a school called Columbus College of Art and Design. And then eventually I transferred to Ohio State and earned my BFA from there. And computers started to fade back a little bit when I was in college because the colleges hadn't quite caught up to how to integrate that technology. Ohio State had one computer lab, and it was sort of out of the way. Not a lot of people knew about it. And I got in there a few times, but I really, by and large, as an undergrad, digital took a back seat. And I was really just focused on analog processes. Ohio State, under the tutelage of Ardeen Nelson, who was my favorite faculty member there, was really into classic zone system modernist photography. They really wanted people to be able to make perfect exposures, be able to control the density and contrast of their film through development, and then make those fine prints with all the finesse that Ansel Adams would bring to his work with his manipulation of negatives and, of course, burning and dodging. And so I learned all of that stuff. And then I thought that's what I was going to do. And so I was doing 4x5 view camera. I was doing a lot of figure study work primarily, and really thought that was going to be my future. And then I had to take this class. It was required, and it was called Alternative Cameras. And that's where I had a Holga placed in my hand. And that just completely derailed everything I was doing before. And so suddenly the view camera took a back seat, and I was completely obsessed with this plastic point and shoot camera that had no control. Although I was still processing my film and printing like a zone person, but I was out there just pointing and shooting and making Holgoramas with a modified plastic camera. And that's what I ended up doing for my BFA thesis exhibition was Holgoramas primarily.
Real quick, do you want to just explain what that is for people that might not know?
So a Holgorama is basically, Holgas don't have gears in them to indicate what frame you're on. They don't care. And so instead of advancing the film all the way to the next frame, I would just partially advance the film. And so the frames overlap. Mm-hmm. And what would happen is I would get and this is on 120 format film, I would just get one giant negative when I processed the film that had all of my frames together. And in fact, I never cut those negatives. I still have them in long sleeves rolled up in tubes because I could never decide, well, where does this image end and where does that image begin? And a lot of times when I revisit that work, I scan different sections because different things start coming forward to me.
Yeah, I need to start keeping. I'm looking at a stack of Holgas across the room, but they come up pretty regularly on the show. I need to just put one here so I can hold it up.
Yeah, Holgas are fantastic, and I highly recommend them. A lot of times, actually, as an educator, when I have students that are in a rut with digital, which can happen, I just say, well, grab a Holga and go shoot a roll of film. And just changing to a square format and taking away all the technology that you have to think about a lot of times helps kind of restart that creative fire that they have. But at any rate, in my case, it completely changed the trajectory of the type of work I was making. And I always joke around that I spent, it ended up being almost 5 years between two schools, learning how to do perfect photography with the most advanced equipment possible, only to graduate with a show of work made with a $20 piece of plastic. So then I took a couple years off. I worked. I actually was at a science museum working as a volunteer coordinator. And so it was just a very managerial job. And so what I would do during my lunch breaks was I'd just go out and shoot. And that's how I created the body of work that I used to apply for grad school. And then right before grad school, or right before I was applying for grad school, 9/11 happened, which also started shifting things and changing the world around me, and definitely started to influence my work. And so I was photographing buildings using the holograma technique and very deliberately making them off kilter and eliminating all humans, which was really difficult to do when you're shooting downtown during lunch hours in an urban city, right? There were people everywhere. And so I had to be very careful about how I made my images during that time. But at any rate, I applied to graduate school out here in Colorado, where I am now. I went to University of Colorado at Boulder. And I thought for sure I was going to continue doing holograma work, that I was going to continue working with architecture. But of course, that's not what happened at all. What actually happened was I started doing holograma work, and my graduate committee just really had no interest in it. And I wasn't getting good response. I wasn't getting good feedback. I was pretty frustrated my first year because I was making a lot of work, but it just wasn't really going anywhere. And then one of my instructors, Ken Iwamasa at Boulder, handed me a D70, a Nikon D70, which had just come out. And that was kind of the first DSLR camera with interchangeable lenses that, an average person could get their hands on. And I was a little skeptical, but what was nice about that camera was I was able to make a ton of work in a really, really short amount of time. And I shifted to studio work as a result. And I also started appropriating things for the very first time ever in grad school. And so what I ended up doing for my MFA thesis was a project called Red versus Blue. And what was happening, of course, is September 11th had happened a couple years prior. And we were seeing all this polarization of media. And that's when really CNN and Fox News started diverging into these completely different directions and which audience they were appealing to. And I was observing that and really not happy about it and kind of predicting some of the things that have come to pass in recent years in my work. And the way I was doing it was I was using toy army men that were painted blue and red. And of course, they were representing the soldiers who were in Afghanistan at the time, fighting the war on terror. And the backgrounds of all the images were appropriated screen grabs from both CNN and Fox News. And so I was trying to kind of turn the mirror back in a way. Now, in my thesis defense, my dissertation, one of my faculty, who I won't name, told me they thought I was overreacting. Which now I'm like, who's overreacting now? And at the time, maybe, it was a little extreme, my viewpoint. The Boulder Daily Camera panned my work completely in the review of the show. which just kind of motivated me to keep doing what I was doing. But at any rate, that's sort of how I got through school. And at that point, I was calling myself a fine art photographer because the work I was doing was really meant to express ideas and wasn't about selling anything, right? And in fact, I never sold any of the work from Red versus Blue because I was very concerned about the copyright issues around my use of the screen grabs. Then I got out of grad school and I started teaching full-time, which was really my goal all along. I loved teaching the entire time I was going through school, even in high school. I was looking forward to a future where I could teach photography and make art. To me, that was the perfect life. And so, I was lucky, quote unquote, maybe. I got full-time work and teaching right out of school at what was called the Art Institute of Colorado in Denver. The problem was that school really worked me to the bone. I was teaching year-round with no breaks. I was teaching 5 classes a term, 4 times a year, so 20 classes a year. And when you do that much teaching, it's really hard to find energy to make art.
Yeah, I did the same thing across the country at a different one.
Yep. Yeah, you know the story. And I didn't realize, because I was still in my 30s at the time, and I was thinking, oh, it'll be fine. I'll find the energy for it. I'll find a way. I'll find that balance. I never really did right away. A little bit. For the first decade I was out of grad school, I was still making work, but it was harder to fully submerge myself in the project ideas. And I was also working with primarily commercial photographers. And so they didn't, their feedback wasn't the feedback I needed for that type of work to really grow. And, just because of my schedule, it was tough for me to really get out there and network with the artistic community as much as I should have been at the time. And so I was primarily doing landscape. I shifted my work to pinhole during that time and did a lot of pinhole work where I was shooting film and then scanning the film and making inkjet prints. So, again, that convergence of technology where, on one end, I'm shooting with a box with a hole in it. And then on the other end, I'm using, Adobe Photoshop and advanced inkjet printers. So sort of the best of both worlds. And then the Art Institute closed, which was probably the best thing that happened for me as an artist because I'm kind of a workhorse. Jim, you know this, and I tend to stay in my lane and just keep doing my thing. And I'm not, constantly looking for those other opportunities for better or worse. But when the Art Institute closed, I was very fortunate that there was a position open at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. And so I applied for that. And miraculously, I got the job. And, there was a lot of competition for that position. So I was amazed. I really thought my wife and I were gonna have to sell the house and move. I'm glad it didn't work out that way because I love Denver. I love Colorado. I'm so happy that I could stay. But at any rate, I've been there for 6 years. And, the one nice thing about that college is that, first of all, it's primarily a fine art school. And so suddenly, instead of being surrounded by just commercial shooters, I'm surrounded by all types of fine artists. There are people there doing everything. And they're really, it's a really strong community. And so that started to get my creative juices going, just being in that environment and being surrounded by those people. And then the pandemic happened at the end of my first year teaching there. As you know, because we were actually in
there together,
Austin, Texas.
Yep.
The week of
Houston. It was Houston.
Houston.
Yeah.
The week when everything broke.
Yes.
I even remember when we had to take our lift back to the airport, and the Lyft driver had put saran wrap up between the front seat and the back seat.
Yep.
To protect them from us.
And they'd swapped out all the water things.
Yeah, it was crazy, but we survived.
We did.
And then, the pandemic, fortunately, RimCAD had a robust online school, so we were able to shift very quickly And I was teaching my classes from my living room instead of, 6 miles down the street. But it gave me time to really introspect and really think about what I was doing and where I was going. And, I started really taking some risks at that point. And so the thing I got into right away was NFT. So this NFT thing was happening. It was really controversial. People were, artists especially, were very skeptical of it. But for me, as somebody who had been playing with digital art forever, I was excited about it because suddenly there was this way to prove a digital artwork was unique and that somebody actually owned it rather than just copy pasta files, right? And being able to download them at will. And so I got into it.
Just one thing real quick. For people that might not know, do you want to explain what an NFT is?
Oh, so an NFT, this is part of blockchain.
I'm sure people have heard of it, but
most people associate that with Bitcoin, but Bitcoin doesn't actually have NFTs. NFT stands for non-fungible token. So it's a digital record that cannot be altered or changed in any way, and it can't be deleted ever. And so that's why it's so useful for authenticating digital art, because what I can do is, in fact, these images right behind me are all part of my NFT project, which I did under an alter ego named Art Block. Art Block actually has its own website, which is art-block.studio, similar to my own. And so I would make these pieces, and then I would mint them as an NFT as a one of one. And then I would sell those to other people using the cryptocurrency. And I was on a blockchain and still am called Algorand, or Algo for short. And so, and that was fun. Now, I never actually converted any of my crypto into US money. It's still sitting on a cold wallet somewhere. For me, it was just more about the exploration, and I wasn't really thinking about it as a way to make money. I just wanted to see, what was the community like? Is this real? Can I actually do this? And it turned out it was an interesting change, because instead of making art for people that would typically be looking for art, I was making art for tech bros. And so it's this whole new community of people that would never actually consider buying art that were suddenly buying my art and then asking me questions about why I made what I made and what it was all about, which was really fascinating to me. And as a teacher, I love being able to just include more people in this world. And then I eventually, towards the end of that, I started experimenting with what's called physically backed NFT, where I would sell an NFT, and then I would actually, and the NFT was made from physical print work, cyanotype, where I'd scan the cyanotype. And we can go to, see here, we go to the digital link. We can probably find some of that. See here. Oh, maybe not. Okay. I guess I don't have it under there. Try analog. I don't know if this stuff's on this website or not. There it is. Good. Alt processes. That one right there is actually a physically backed. Yeah, and this one I did as well. Physically backed. Perfect. Okay. So in this example, this is a combo print, which is a Van Dyke combined with a cyanotype. And one of them is from a digital negative, a photograph. And the other one is actually just leaves laid on the paper, a photogram. And at any rate, so I'd scan these in, I'd make an NFT of them, and then I'd sell the NFT. And then if you wanted, now not everybody took me up on this, because in the NFT world, a lot of people don't want to be doxxed. They don't want, they use aliases like I did, and they don't want you to know who they are. So at any rate, but if you wanted to, I would then send you the actual print of this. And in several cases I did. If you scroll down here, see here. And if you click on that second one there.
The one that says love?
No, the one right next to it. To the left, yep. So that image, and that sign, there's my Art Block signature. So
Art Block has a nice signature. I like it.
Yeah, I like that one. It was fun. It's better than mine. So this one, the individual who ended up purchasing this is in New York. And I know that because they had me send them the print. And I did actually have a few international. I didn't think this through from a financial standpoint. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll send you the print. And then somebody from England's like, oh, okay, send me the print. I'm like, well, that shouldn't be a big deal. And it was like $70 to ship a print to England. I went, oh, I should probably maybe be clear that only North American free shipping. But at any rate, this was sort of at the end. You see May 22. So NFT was starting to really fizzle out because crypto was crashing. And so the market just vanished. And so Art Block still exists, but Art Block is on hiatus until, people are back there and care about that stuff again, which I think will happen.
I hope he's getting some nice rest and relaxation.
But then, as a result of being in this community, one of the people who was another NFT artist that I knew had gotten invited to the beta of Midjourney. And they approached me and they're like, hey, listen, I think you would really like this artificial intelligence thing. I hadn't heard anything about it yet. This was early days for AI. And he's like, I have some invitations. Do you want one? I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. Let me in there. And I just got completely obsessed at that point with NFT. And so go back to the home. Oh, hopefully you don't hear that. They're shredding something outside my house. Is that coming through?
A little bit.
Okay. I apologize to your audience. This, of course, is when people show up to shred things. Anyway, so I started getting into AI. And if you go to digital link for me, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then go down to the false history.
Yeah, these are fun.
The first project. And so the very first thing I was interested in about AI was that I knew that all of the training had come from the internet. And so I knew it would know photography history really well as a result. And so my first thing was trying to draw out what it knew about history, but to take a different approach. So I knew people were making false narratives, and so I decided to make one too. And my false narrative was that AI decided to put itself into history as if it had existed, before the year 2022 or the 2000s at least. And so this is me trying to create Anna Atkins, except Anna Atkins now is not using cyanotype, but is using a Xerox copier. Because in this scenario, she had access to advanced technology. Go ahead and go to the next work here.
Yep.
It's a small pile. Hopefully it won't take long. This is Edward Muybridge robot locomotion. Edward Muybridge, of course, studied a lot of motion of humans, horses, and other things in the late 1800s. And so if AI could exist, it would exist as a robot in physical form. And so, of course, in this scenario, AI did exist as robot in the late 1800s, and Edward Muybridge studied its motion. And of course, you couldn't freeze motion with those materials very well, and robots move really fast, right?
Yeah, so of course. Yeah, much faster than a horse.
Much faster. You can go to the next one. This is a fine art portrait of a robot by Julia Margaret Cameron, who, of course, was one of the people who really started giving credibility to photography as an art form. And I thought, what would that portrait look like? And this is one example of that.
I find the eyes on this really unsettling, which I really like.
Yes. There's a lot of unsettling things in my AI work, as you'll discover soon. Go ahead and go to the next one. This is a Lewis Hine photograph of a robot with a child laborer in a coal mine.
That's really funny.
And the robot somehow also has a childlike quality, which I thought was hilarious.
Well, you got to make the kids feel comfortable.
You got to, yeah.
They're going to be working. You got to make them feel comfortable.
Go ahead and go to the next one. And then this was one of the first ones I actually made. And this one was with DALL-E, an early version of DALL-E. Most of my work's Midjourney, but this one I was exploring another AI generator. And so this is Henri Cartier-Bresson's Decisive Moment, except it's a robot hopping over the puddle instead of a person. And for whatever reason, it's a miniature robot. And we're looking at a scaled down version of the photograph. That, I believe that shadow in the water there is meant to be the fence that's in the Henri Cartier-Bresson photograph. And so it's this micro version but it knows the photo, right? The composition, the tonal range, it really recreated it more or less.
Yeah, it knows that kind of like right above the water sort of pose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this case, unfortunately, in the actual decisive moment photo, the subject remains dry and they splash down the moment after the photo's taken. But in this photo, the robot wasn't so lucky and did actually splash down during the decisive moment.
That's really funny. Should I go to the next one?
Sure.
Oh,
this
twins.
is Diane Artist, of course, one of her most well-known projects are twins. She always shot the Twins Festival in Twinsburg, Ohio. These are twin robots photographed by Diane Artist. Quick side note, none of this actually happened for your viewers. This is a false history of photography.
Yes. But tied into what really happened with, Lewis Hine photographing child laborers or in this case, the identical twins photographed by Diane Arbus.
Well, and I love history. So what's really great about this project is it allows me to explore history from a fiction standpoint, right? And to make work that, would be very complicated, expensive, and time-consuming to produce if I did it purely analog. But, with AI, I'm able to literally sit on my couch with my phone and work on these ideas. And so I was able to fill in some of the gaps in my schedule with exploration. And this is a project I'm actually going back to.
Oh, good.
And the goal is to create an actual history book where I recreate the entire history of photography through AI, where AI injects itself into these scenarios, including the text.
Oh, that's fun.
Let's go ahead and can you back up to the home page for me, please?
Oh, the home page?
Yeah, home. Perfect.
Okay.
All righty. So then this work that you're seeing here, this is part of a project called Fake Plants, Real Prints, which is more recent. And if you click on that image, it should take you to the perfect. So this is me trying to collaborate with AI and trying to take maybe a little more ownership over the work because purely AI work, is work that I would never sell and that I consider conceptual art. Because it's really about the idea, not necessarily about the resulting object. This is a little more in between. And so what I'm doing here is during the pandemic, I got a lot of houseplants like this one back here. And as you can probably tell, oh, that's funny. By the one back here, I'm not really taking great care of them anymore because the pandemic's over and I'm busy again. And so I decided, how does AI view an unhealthy houseplant? And so all these generations were made with the same prompt, which is photograph of an unhealthy houseplant. And I just ask it to interpret what that means. And so I make these generations. And by the way, the generations are full color. They look completely different from these cyanotype versions. Then I print out a digital negative, an inkjet negative, and make handmade cyanotype prints. And I only make one. So one of one, I addition them. Those titles you're seeing at the bottom come from the AI generator. Those are what are called a seed phrase, and that's how the AI identifies the individual outcomes that come from the exact same prompt.
I love that they're called a seed phrase.
Yeah, seed phrase. In fact, with that information, you could actually go into Midjourney and find that image because it would recognize that data. And just a quick side note, for those of you who may not be aware, AI never generates the same thing twice, ever. It'll generate close variations, which you'll see in the next project I'm going to talk about, but it never, ever, ever makes the exact same thing twice, even when you're using the exact same prompt over and over again. And that's why they have seed phrases, so they can tell them apart. But at any rate, the idea here is I'm just questioning, first of all, is it art? Like the fact that I printed these, does that make them original art? Is it authentic now? Am I an artist? Is the AI the artist?
And you're making your handmade cyanotypes where you're brushing the emulsion on watercolor paper. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening here between cyanotypes history with botanical prints.
Yeah, well, and that's why I picked
Yeah.
plants as a subject. I was thinking about Anna Atkins,
Mm-hmm.
who we consider the first female artist, although she was a botanist and would never have accepted you calling her an artist at the time. But, we associate this process with her because she was the first one to use it on a large project, which were British algae from the 1840s.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a nod to history again, because history really comes up in my work a lot. But yeah, they're handmade. I mix my own chemistry. I measure out raw chemistry and mix it myself. I coat these myself. I make the negatives. I print them. I process them, right? And these things are like little artifacts.
And these are like 5x7 ish or something, or 8x10s, or
the paper size is 7 by 10 inches.
Okay.
So they're small and precious.
Yeah.
And then the print size is roughly 6 by 6 inches, give or take.
Yeah.
If you go back to the homepage where the gallery view is. So this was an idea that came about on how to display them when I finally got an opportunity. The first opportunity I had to show this work was a group called Todd Projects that's here in Denver. Reached out to me and they were doing a pop-up exhibition at a taxidermy shop of all places. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm on board. That sounds really cool. Super unique. And when I got there, the shelf that they had set aside for me was just covered with all of these fake plants. And I was just like, well, I'm not moving these. I'm just going to go ahead and put the prints up with the fake plants. Part of it was laziness. And part of it was just, like, let's see how people respond. And the response was really interesting. People were liking that extra layer of fake versus real versus fake. Like, what even is real? And so now the last 2 times I've displayed them, one was at the faculty show at RimCAD, and then which is what this photograph is from. And then I was also in a show called Less is More, which Angela Ferris curated at Arapahoe Community College as part of Month of Photography. And so now when I display them on a shelf outside of a frame with fake plants. And so these are fake plants a la Michael's. Although I have been told that IKEA has a very large selection of plants, so I will be visiting them soon to get more fake plants. And I liked not framing them because it's creating this fun tension about here's this one-of-one art piece, and then I just set it on a shelf. And anybody could touch it and do whatever. Now, nobody does because people have this weird training about art where they know, look, don't touch. But, it was fun. And so I kind of consider these mini installations now for this project. And any time in the future that I'm asked to do this, it's going to be, well, where can I put my fake plants? If I'm not going to have a shelf, it won't work. And then the big project, if you scroll down here, and this is, kind of showing you the immensity of it. I've been working on this project for 2+ years now. It's called Typical American. And I've been using the exact same prompt thousands of times. And so the prompt is just photograph of a typical American, which is completely open-ended. And it has the AI has an extremely clear point of view about what that means. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing out all of the bias that's in the training data. And so it has a very distinct look. It has a very distinct type of person that it wants to show us, and a very distinct visual style and how it wants to show that to us. And that comes from us, right? We trained the AI without even knowing it by the way we depict ourselves and also how we tag images using alt text. And of course, one of the comments I get about this work a lot is that, a lot of the subjects look conservative. And I'm like, well, yeah. And it usually comes from one of my art friends who's not as conservative. And I say, well, when's the last time you tagged yourself American in a photograph? And they're like, oh, never. I'm like, well, guess what? Those folks do.
Yeah.
And, so that's where a lot of this comes from. If you click on it, it'll go into the individual tab. And so these are some of the ones that were in an exhibition that I was just part of a group show called History Reimagined at Colorado Photographic Arts Center. That was curated by Samantha Johnston. And that was one of the best surprise emails that I've ever gotten in my inbox ever. I got home from work one day, I opened up my Gmail, and I had an invitation to an AI exhibition at a photo center during Month of Photography.
Mm-hmm.
And so my response to Samantha was, "Are you sure you want to do this show?" Because I knew it was going to be controversial, and it absolutely was.
Yeah.
First of all, it's the center, Colorado Center of Photography, or Photographic Arts Center, rather.
Mm-hmm.
It has the word photography in it.
It does.
We're showing artificial intelligence that looks like photography. So immediately when the show was announced, there was pushback from the community. And this is, again, part of why I call myself a conceptual artist now instead of a fine art photographer, is that I don't want to throw around the term photographer when I'm showing work like this, because this isn't photography. AI is not photography. I want to be perfectly clear about that. It is an imitator of photography that was trained on photography. But the term I like to use to describe these now are AI-generated synthetic images, because they come entirely from a machine. And there really is, other than typing a prompt, there's no human involvement.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's lots of fun things that happens in these. Like in this one, you'll notice that the subject is wearing two different types of shoes.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't ask for that, right? The prompt is always photograph of a typical American. And so all the stuff it does, that's how AI is interpreting what that should mean. If you want to click through some of these.
Sure.
So, and I have over 4,000 of these.
Yeah, you have a whole town of them.
I don't have enough data on my web plan to actually show you all of them. So I just show selections of these. And, for your viewers who are interested, my Instagram story, I try to post a new typical American every day, and I'll still never show all 4,000 of them that way. And here's the other thing. I keep making these. And so I'm at over 4,000 now, but eventually it's going to be 5,000 or 6,000 or whatever, because I'm really sort of obsessed with this, and I'm going to keep making them until it stops working.
And how many do you make a week?
It depends on the week. Usually what happens is my plan's coming up to renew and I still have a bunch of minutes left. Mm-hmm. And with Midjourney, minutes don't roll over. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of each month, I'm just furiously generating these to try to use up my minutes to get value for my subscription.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of a cheapskate, and so I don't want to leave any money on the table.
Sure.
But this image right here, this image is full of negative stereotypes.
It is. Yeah.
And I, as a photographer, I would never, ever, ever make a photograph like this. Like, never. There would be alarm bells going off all over the place about, the stereotypes I'm perpetuating and, my negative portrayal of the subject. But when AI does this, I'm really happy because it proves a point, mm-hmm. which is that AI has bias embedded in the algorithm, and that you actually have to put a concentrated effort forth to make generations that don't have bias in them. You have to be extremely deliberate with your prompts to avoid stuff like this. I mean, this one honestly makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, let's move to the next one.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. This is a very popular one from the show. This one was actually used in the Denver Post when they promoted the show before it opened. Although they got my name wrong, which I thought was just kind of perfect for an AI artist, right? That they got the image up and then attributed it to somebody that didn't exist. This person doesn't exist. The person who got credit for this photo when they first used it doesn't exist. And I thought that was pretty fun once I was done being mad about it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, we can go to the next one. There's a lot of flags in these. I'm sure you're noticing. It really heavily associates that phrase with flags. And even when a flag's not in it, it uses red, white, and blue color themes, and it uses blue blocks and red and white stripes somewhere. So it's always referenced. There's a lot of face painting.
Yeah.
I really think that comes from American football.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Because, of course, when the NFL posts their photographs in the alt text, they have to say American football because football is soccer to the rest of the world, right? And so if they just do football, it gets lumped in with all of that.
I think it's really fascinating that there is a trace of the photographer in this one, in the sunglasses.
Yeah.
Like the person that took the picture, even though that person also doesn't exist.
Yep. But somebody does, I should say, lots of somebodies do exist that have taken photographs where they were reflected in sunglasses.
Exactly, yeah.
So on this particular generation, it was referencing those tables.
Yeah.
When it was compiling the image. Go ahead and go to the next one.
Cars, yeah.
Yeah, we see a car culture big, and then stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of these images have tons of stuff because Americans have lots of stuff.
And like condiments and sodas.
Yeah, it's usually junk food. Go ahead and go to the next one. Right. So at any rate, I continue to make these. They keep surprising me. One of my favorite things is when I get what are called hallucinations, where the AI starts making mistakes. And hopefully we'll see. Oh, yeah, this one's another one that's like really pretty offensive.
Yeah.
And you'll notice this one doesn't have a flag, but there's blue blocks on the face, and there's red and white stripes in the feathers, and there are little star patterns around the face as well. And there's your flag, even though we don't have it literally.
Oh, I think I see a hallucination there, maybe, or just an AI weird thing happening with the hand.
Yeah, starting to.
Yeah.
It's not quite attached to the person.
Yeah.
Not a full hallucination yet, though.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we have. Oh, this one's fun, too. And there's whenever there are other portraits, I'm always fascinated with the other artwork that's being represented in a generation, like this one that has a portrait of some guy, and now I'm trying to associate this portrait of a guy who doesn't exist with this portrait of this woman who doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the story? What was AI trying to get at? This one's fun too, with the weird puffball earrings.
Yeah.
But none of these people exist. They are all amalgams of all other portraits that the AI was trained on. And it's referencing specific data sets.
The headdress on this one is crazy.
Yep. We go to the next one. I may not have put any hallucinations in this particular grouping, which happens.
Oh, look at that cow.
Oh, here's one. Yeah, so random animals. Another thing it'll do too is it will, when it hallucinates, instead of having a human being, it'll have an animal, oftentimes an eagle, dressed up like a person.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Which is fun. In fact, my Discord avatar is one of those eagles.
Oh, that's fun.
And go forward. Yeah, here's another one where there's not a flag, but all of the flag elements are there.
Yeah. It's funny, the car in the back. It's like, where's that tire in relationship to the rest of the car? It looks like it's right in the center.
It looks like a combination of a car and a camper trailer. To me. Like it couldn't make up its mind. And I should say AI is bad at doing more than one thing. And so it always do one thing really well in the photo, and then all the other things get less successful the further back you go and the less significant it is. Here's a kind of a hallucination where the person is seated, but there's nothing to sit on.
Yeah. Also, he's holding an extra finger between the thumb and the forefinger, I think.
Yep.
But yeah, he is totally just kind of sitting where there's no seat. So it's like you get like the flag is kind of a reoccurring thing. There's the fast food, the cars, the animals, particularly eagles. I've seen in some of them.
And then the expressions.
And the expressions. Oh, here's an eagle. Yeah, here
here's
we
a
go.
great hallucination. It was just halfway between. It's like, oh, bald eagle, American, and then I asked for a portrait. I didn't say it had to be of a person, but for whatever reason, it always wants to do that, and so it sort of met in the middle on this particular one.
It's so funny.
Yeah, they're great.
But I mean, it says a lot about typical Americans, I guess.
Well, the other thing I get a lot of feedback on are the expressions with the human subjects. If you go to the next one, we'll have a human again.
Okay.
Yeah, we're at the beginning. So
yeah,
they always have sort of the same expression.
It's a really serious, vacant stare.
And I've gotten a lot of questions about that. And what I think, and this is just a guess, because I really don't know what's going on under the hood. I can't see the algorithm working, and I can't see all of the data sets that it's referencing. But what I believe it's trying to do is show pride. American pride.
It's like stoic.
Yes. But AI is terrible at emotions. It really doesn't understand what an emotion is because it's just math. And so, for example, I did a project which has never been shown where I was just, portrait of group of people laughing. And they always come out looking absolutely insane, like they're about to murder somebody.
Terrifying.
It doesn't even know what joy should look like. It just really doesn't understand emotion. If you scroll down here, this page has some more stuff going on. So there's a project statement for your viewers if they're interested.
Okay.
And then these are some links to some places where the work. Oh, go back up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So over that image, and you don't have to click on these links, but there's a link there. So if you want to see the History Reimagined webpage and the other artists that were included, which were Philip Toledano, who did a project called Another America, and then Laura Rizolki, I'm probably pronouncing her name incorrectly, sorry, Laura, who is a Finnish artist who is in the show. And her work is all about the depiction of Finnish women before the male gaze. And she uses a lot of her own photography as a reference, as a starting point for the work. The other thing that's on that History Reimagined link is we did a 2-hour artist panel the day after the opening, a very contentious artist panel.
I've heard. I wasn't there, but I heard about it the next day.
It was a packed house. There were at least 60 people there, and they had some very, very tough and direct questions. But the audio recording of that artist talk is available on that link for anyone who's interested.
Was there anything that stood out as particularly poignant?
I think that most people were just upset about how the models were trained. And we were the first human beings to sit in front of them to willingly admit we used the models. And so I think in a lot of ways, we were just an easy target. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were just kind of venting frustrations about things that we as users of the technology have absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
And in fact, my work is critical of a lot of that stuff. I'm actually, a typical American, I'm trying to point out the problems with AI and how it perpetuates biases and stereotypes and how it magnifies specific identities while marginalizing or completely excluding others. For example, I have over 4,000 generations. I have never gotten an Asian American.
Oh, wow.
Not once.
Interesting.
So now what's that all about? And so suddenly that's a problem because there's a whole group of people that aren't being represented by this technology, depending on the words you use.
Yeah. So the day after that event, a mutual friend of ours kind of asked me if I had much experience with Midjourney, and I showed them how to use it, and they were just blown away with some of the things that you could do with it. And maybe now's a good time to kind of talk about like the ethics of different AI platforms. I know we didn't talk about bringing that up necessarily, but
no, we can't.
Yeah, I think it's worth. I think it's worth it.
From an ethical standpoint, I've always really treaded lightly. One of the first artworks I made, and if you go up to the digital link again, I can show you this work as I'm talking about it. And then go to photographic illustrations. Oh, so this was, I should mention this one. This is not about AI, but this was a conceptual project I did using NFT. And so what NFT does is they come out with these protocols called ARC, A-R-C, that allow you to do different things with an NFT. And so this ARC protocol had just come out where you could make an NFT where you could change the image associated with it. And it would store all of the previous image states in the NFT. And so what I did with this project was I made a composite from start to finish with an NFT so that the entire workflow is stored in one file. And so the first state is actually a blank canvas. So when I first minted it, it was just a white 4,000 by 4,000 pixel thing. And then I updated it with my idea sketches. So then you see my ideation. Then I updated it with contact sheets. So all this stuff I photographed. This is all me. This is not AI. And so you see my contact sheets, my proof sheets from the different shoots. Then you see me start to make the composite. And so you can see me working through the composite, and it changes a lot along the way. And then at the very end, we have this. This is the final state. So when you load this NFT, this comes up first, but then you can access and see every other step along the way. And that was a really, really fun project. I was so sad when NFT fizzled because I had just started getting into these really fun conceptual ideas using the technology, and then the audience was gone. I'm like, darn it. Yeah. But at any rate, let's scroll down here, and I'm just going to have you click on the crows.
Sure. That's a fun one.
So this was the first artwork I made using AI generations, and the photograph is mine. All of the crows were generated using DALL-E. And the reason why I decided to do crows was because I was thinking a lot about copyright issues, and I knew full well that DALL-E had scraped the internet to train its model. And so I wanted to pick a subject that it would have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of different examples of, so that whatever I generated out of it would be an amalgam of tons of stuff. So there's no way I would directly be copying anybody's artwork or art style. Then I further went on and like, you know, colored the crows. The main crow characters here are illustrated. I went in and did some drawing, added some textures. And so I really was very much trying to put my hand into it so that I felt like I could own it. And this work was actually selected for what's called Nightlights Denver as part of the 2023 month of photography.
Yeah.
And I fully disclosed, it was called Murder of Artificial Crows. And then in the description, I fully disclosed the use of AI when I submitted it for the show, which was juried by Samantha Johnson. And she accepted it, which I was super excited about. This thing was projected on the Daniel and Fisher Clock Tower in downtown Denver for a month. So my crows were menacing anybody on the mall. And then one day I was talking to her after this, and I just mentioned like, yeah, I was really excited that you were willing to show work where AI had been used. And she's like, wait, AI? You used AI?
That's funny.
So, even though I had totally disclosed it and been completely transparent about my process, the juror still didn't realize. Now, it didn't matter to her at the end because I had done enough that it was considered.
Sure.
But just to the ethics point. And so that's why when I'm using AI, I'm always trying to find ways of using it ethically. Mm-hmm. Like typical Americans, I don't sell that work. I never have. I never will, because that's work that my hand's not in that at all. That's more of an observation. I'm just using a prompt as a way to draw out bias to show it to you so we can have a conversation about it. And so I can't copyright that work, and I wouldn't try. Fake plants, real prints, on the other hand, I've interacted enough with that process to where I legally can and am in the process of copyrighting that work. And I do consider that my artwork. But all of the AI models, with the exception of, with the exception of Adobe Firefly, Shutterstock one, I always forget the name of.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Getty AI, which is also under iStock.
Yeah.
Those are the only models that exist that are trained on licensed content.
Yeah.
So
the stuff within their stock libraries.
Yep. So Adobe Firefly, for example, any artist whose work has been used to train that model, they gave consent, and they're getting, I don't know what it is, and nobody's ever been able to tell me this, but they're getting some type of royalty, allegedly, anytime their work is being referenced in an AI generation. Now, I don't know how that works exactly, and I've asked representatives of all three of those organizations, well, how does your compensation work? And none of them can answer that question.
Yeah, I've been in similar situations where people have asked and they're like, that's above my pay grade.
Yeah, pretty much that's the response I get. But here's the rub. The less data that you have in an AI model, the worse the AI is.
Yeah, Firefly's not great.
So Firefly is kind of funky.
Yeah.
It can do illustrative work okay, but when you ask it to do photographs, it struggles because it just doesn't have that many photography examples in its training like Midjourney or DALL-E does.
Well, in the case of those, they're just using the entire internet, right?
They all used a model that was part of a nonprofit training effort, and it started around 2015, where they just, any image that's out on the internet, and that means any image on the internet. So some of it's not so great. Like that means also pornography got scraped off the internet and put into these things, violent images, things that probably shouldn't be in the training are in there because they were just pulling in any data they could, because the more data that they have, the better the models got faster. And so that's where the ethical issue is. Now,
there's also an environmental component to it.
I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
In America, the courts have really upheld that was okay, that's fair use. And like it or not, that means that there's really no recourse for us as artists. There are a lot of lawsuits currently going on against people like Midjourney and DALL-E. DALL-E is owned by OpenAI, which is Sam Altman's company, that also does ChatGPT, for those that aren't aware. And so there's a ton of lawsuits. Like the New York Times actually won a lawsuit against ChatGPT recently, which is kind of interesting. But it's because ChatGPT was literally copying things from New York Times articles without changing it. And so once that happens, you're busted. That hasn't been going on in image generators. All that's happening in image generators is that I can very easily copy the style of another artist by just saying, give me a portrait of blah, blah, blah in the style of Diane Arbus.
You could even put a style reference in as an upload. And
and you can download an image illegally and upload it to the AI and use that as a style reference. But it's still making something completely unique as a result. And so this is where things get tricky with copyright. You can't copyright style. You can only copyright a specific output. Okay. And we shouldn't want to copyright style. Just as an artist, that's a slippery slope, because we're all, as human beings, we're influenced by other art styles. And that drives our own style that we develop. But we all start out by imitating and emulating other artists that we love. And then we learn how to have our own voice as an artist, right? So we don't want to get to a place where we're suddenly copywriting style. Okay. Yeah. But having said that, there needs to be some kind of opt-in, opt-out system. There needs to be some type of, recourse when your work is used to train a model without your permission. That, in my opinion, is not okay, even though the courts are upholding that it is. So that's where we're at with the ethics and legality of all of it. These are big businesses, not Midjourney so much, but DALL-E and ChatGPT are huge, even though they're technically nonprofit. They make bank a lot of money. And that means they have a lot of influence over legislation and law. And, us as individuals have far less. So we're in a sticky situation as far as that's concerned. I'm not sure what the future is going to hold. But if we suddenly get to a point where they outlaw the original training data, you're going to see AI regress big time, because suddenly they're not going to have enough data to make it work the way that it's currently working.
So you mentioned you're going to get to the environmental component. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, that's, that one is, it's tough. I'm an environmentalist. I really do care about the environment and try to make conscious choices to protect it. But yet I generate with AI, and we know it uses a lot of energy, which is water, right, at the end of the day, to cool the servers and to do all the things they need to do. But that's based on current technology, and I don't think that's going to stay the norm. Okay. We already saw with, what was the Chinese? China just came out with, within the last 6 months, an AI model that is 10 times more efficient than ChatGPT.
Oh, really?
Can't remember the name of it offhand. Yeah. I'm sorry. And all it was just a change in the algorithm. And suddenly it's not using nearly as much power. So I really do think this is still early days.
Yeah.
The very first generator model was in 2015. The very first publicly available one was 2022. Okay. Yeah. So this is super, super early days. And I really think they're going to fix that problem. And we're also on the verge of some pretty fantastic renewable energy sources. And this is driving it, because the power demand of these data centers is so huge that suddenly there's profitability in developing alternative energy sources again. So yeah. I think right now, bad. It's doing really bad things. And I'm not going to lie, I sometimes feel guilty when I sit down and do a long session and think about the power I just used somewhere. Not in my backyard, but somewhere. Mm-hmm. But I think it's temporary. I really don't see this as being a long-term issue. And, it's not being talked about as much anymore as a result. Right. People are really focusing more on the date. Where does the data come from? How are artists being compensated? And how can you opt out?
Yeah. All right. Well, we are just a little over an hour. So I think what I'm going to do is drop us back out to this view. And one of the things I like to end with is do you have any advice for creators that want to pursue a career in the arts? And yes. Just curious what that would be.
I think the biggest thing is that you have to stay true to your ideas and try not to let people influence you with their opinions. And my NFT and AI exploration have been, I've not been popular with certain people, especially in NFT had the same energy thing, which is kind of funny because it uses almost nothing compared to AI. But AI has been super controversial, and I have definitely gotten a lot of pushback. There were a lot of really negative comments on the Instagram post that Colorado Photographic Arts Center put up about the show. There was some hubbub at the college I taught at when the college promoted that I had gotten at this show, and it upset some students who then proceeded to go on social media and let that be known. That 2-hour artist talk, it was kind of confrontational. Yeah. I mean,
torches and pitchforks
at me.
Yeah.
I'm just an artist here, and I don't own this stuff.
Right.
But I think you just have to stay true to what you believe in, even when it's not necessarily popular. If you have an idea that you're trying to express, you should go for it. And sometimes you just have to block out that noise and just stick to it. And it may fail. It may not go anywhere, like the NFT work. I had a lot of successes over there, but it never did anything for my art career outside of the computer. I never got asked to show any of that work, publicly ever. And for a long time, I didn't even have it on my website because it was an alter ego.
Right. So you kept art block separate for quite a while.
Yeah, for a while I did.
Yeah.
And part of it was because the classic art world had such negative views about NFT that I was worried about associating myself with that. And then I got over that, and I was like, to hell with it. If they have a problem with it, they have a problem with it. This is the work I made, and I'm proud of it. Like, I love the work I made as art block because it was completely different for me. But yeah, you just have to stick to your guns and, follow your passion. And I think for me I'm probably different from a lot of the guests you've had on the show. As I was looking through the catalog, a lot of the folks are making, work commercially, or they're making work with the intent of selling the work. That's, part of why I call myself a conceptual artist now, is because I don't think about that at all. It's great if I can sell some prints and make a little bit of money, but that's not what I'm thinking about when I create the work. I'm being true to my ideas, and I'm being true to what I want to express. And I think that's the best advice I can give anyone that's trying to make artwork is don't think about the money. Focus on the art. And then if all goes well, hopefully the money thing will happen, and stay tuned. I'll let you know when that happens.
All right. Well, I think that's good advice. As we wrap up, Todd, is there anything coming up, or is there a way that you'd like people to keep up with what you're doing?
So as I mentioned before, the Instagram account, I do post, I try to post a new typical American a day. I also post up some of my other experiments using the stories. And then I do have a blog on my website that you can subscribe to. I'm an infrequent blogger, so you're not going to get bombarded with notifications about my blogs. But when I do make a blog, it's, there's something important going on, or there's something that is more complete that I'm trying to share. So that's a good way to keep up as well. And, right now I'm really just sort of taking a little bit of a breather. Month of Photography, which was March of this year. I was in the one really large group show. I was in 3 other shows at the same time. That was a lot. I was running around town constantly, meeting people at all these different places. And so right now I'm just kind of catching my breath. Sure. And then I'm going to dive back into the false history of photography and try to fully expand that.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and talking to everybody about the work that you're creating.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude episode 12. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. It helps us connect with more photography lovers just like you.